If this weren't JD Vance, the absurdity, the sadness, the embarrassing nature of what we're about to watch would almost make me feel bad for the person. JD Vance was asked about the fact that the momentum in the polls seems to be going in the direction of Vice President Kamala Harris. Not seems, it is going in that direction. And that's very exciting if you are advocating for the pro-democracy movement, the common sense governance movement, etc. But JD Vance has an interesting theory they're now rolling out, which is, oh, no. The polls are being used to suppress Republican turnout, and they're fake. And then we'll look at other moments from this interview. But I saw someone respond to this saying, all right, well, we're to this stage of the campaign now, where it's time to start talking about fake polls. And the other thing is, I saw even Alex Jones saying, don't believe any polls, don't believe anything that shows Harris could legitimately win, because the only reasonable outcome is Trump wins, and if anything else happens, this is me summarizing his general message, but if anything happens other than Trump winning, it must be illegitimate. So that's what they're setting up here, but here's JD Vance on Fox News.
How does that not line up then with another poll we got out this morning, Washington Post, ABC? They're giving the vice president nationally a 4 to 5 point lead. Those are new numbers. So if you think the momentum is not swinging, or your internal polls are suggesting differently, every other poll that's been released has shown great momentum in her direction.
You know, Shannon, I think there are a lot of polls that actually show her stagnating and leveling off. Of course, ABC Washington Post was a wildly inaccurate pollster in the summer of 2020. And look, if you see the numbers that we're seeing and you actually talk to the American people, I feel extremely confident that we're going to be in the right place come November. We can't worry about polls. We have to run through the finish line and encourage everybody to get out there and vote. But our message is going to be very simple. If you want to get back to the peace and prosperity, the rising take-home pay, Donald Trump delivered it once, and he can do it again.
Really? I remember a complete and total public health, economic, and social collapse under his watch that was exacerbated by his mishandling of it.
If you want to double down on the failed policies that have delivered higher food prices and higher housing prices, well, Kamala Harris has been vice president for 3.5 years, and I guarantee she's going to make the problem worse if the American people give her a promotion.
So
the thing we have to remember, one final point, let me just say one final.
And then we'll get to his big point here, but I want to remind you, if Biden-Harris, if that administration was so bad in its handling of the economic disaster that was left for them by Trump, why is it that we saw lower inflation than many of our counterparts globally? So clearly there's a global phenomenon because of the pandemic, and then our handling of it yielded better circumstances than a lot of other countries. We outpaced the recovery. Maybe it was a super painful crisis, exacerbated by your guy, as his medical professionals who surrounded him have now revealed. We could have saved a lot of lives if he had handled it better. And maybe you're trying to exploit the pain that came of that moment for political purposes, fear-mongering about problems but with no real solutions, and then criticizing every time Kamala Harris has a solution to lowering costs.
A point on this, Shannon, because I think it's important. Consistently, what you've seen in 2016 and 2020 is that the media uses fake polls to drive down Republican turnout and to create dissension and conflict with Republican voters. I'm telling you, every single person who's watching this, the Trump campaign is in a very, very good spot. We're going to win this race. We just have to run through the finish line.
Okay. So, zero evidence fake polls are being used to suppress Republican turnout. Also, it doesn't make any sense, because most likely Harris will be leading in the polls, but not by a ton, which is the perfect thing for turnout. When I hear that the candidate I want to win is trailing a little bit in the polls, that's the best incentive to go vote. Pushing ideas that someone's leading by a lot suppresses the person's side that is leading, right? It's easier to say I'm not going to go vote if the polls look absolutely incredible for you. It's harder when it can make a difference because the other person's leading a little bit. So the logic there doesn't make any sense, and it drives me crazy that they can get away with a month ago citing the polls nonstop as proof of how much the American people love Trump, because he was leading Biden in most of the polls. And so every point was, look at the polls. People hate Biden. They love Trump. Woohoo! Even though he was still super unpopular, but he just happened to be leading in those sorts of, matchups. What am I thinking of? Gosh, the matchups in the polls. But that would be the thing they cited. These very polls were proof that Trump's campaign was so strong. And now that the polls have shifted, same pollsters, now they're all fake, and the media uses it in some conspiracy. But the media was reporting on all the bad Biden polls. Then the media reported on Trump leading Harris, and now the media is reporting on Harris leading Trump. How could that be a conspiracy? It doesn't make any sense. Here's more.
Giving Kamala Harris control over inflation policy, Shannon, it's like giving Jeffrey Epstein control over human trafficking policy. The American people are much smarter than that. They don't buy the idea that Kamala Harris represents a fresh start. She is more of the same. It is doubling down on the failed policies of the Harris administration to give Kamala Harris a promotion rather than to fire her, which is what I think most Americans are going to do on November.
Gosh, I just cannot wait. You know, I don't like using petty sorts of phrases or things that could be construed to be childish, right? So I'm not going to say what Adam Kinzinger said about flushing Trump Vance down the toilet of history politically. But let me just say it this way. It will be very nice to not have to interact with, if hopefully they fade out of political relevance if we defeat them in November, this sort of dishonesty and just the nonsense, right? Then you have this.
I mean, our Fox News polling does show the economy is the #1 issue and that people do give you all the edge on that. And yet, this is what we have out from some new polling out of the New York Times. They say Ms. Harris is now leading Mr. Trump among likely voters in Arizona, 50-45, and is even edged ahead of Mr. Trump in North Carolina, a state Mr. Trump won 4 years ago, while narrowing his lead significantly in Georgia and Nevada. What is the administration doing, the campaign doing with that data as it comes in? I mean, these are critical states that you got to have a path to 270. Are there any pivots? Are there any, reconfiguring of what you're doing in the strategy? Because you talk about your message, but is it not landing?
Well, let me say two things about this, Shannon. First of all, the polls tend to radically overstate Democrats. We certainly saw that during the polling of summer of 2020 and summer of 2016. And, of course, a lot of those polls were wrong when it came to Election Day. The second thing I'll say, Shannon, is what we have certainly seen is that Kamala Harris got a bit of a sugar high a couple of weeks ago. But what we've actually seen from our own internal data, Shannon, is that Kamala Harris has already leveled off. If you talk to insiders in the Kamala Harris campaign, they're very worried about where they are because the American people just don't buy the idea that Kamala Harris...
Okay, same thing there. I'm sure you're in contact with insiders in the Kamala Harris campaign. And, I want to make sure that I always emphasize the reason we're reporting on this is because I do think hope's important in motivating us, but it's also just being informed on where the state of the race is. We're all going to go out and vote, okay? So don't get too caught up in, where do things look in this state and that state? Just do the work as if we were behind and it's going to be close and we want to win, But the thing that I find so interesting about it is that what we're watching does seem to be the spiraling out of control of a political campaign with Trump's campaign because he doesn't really know how to run against Vice President Harris. He's struggling in the petty attacks, the personal stuff. Now saying he is better looking than her at a recent rally. And to see whenever you define yourself so much by your loyalty to one person, when it becomes a personality cult, it becomes impossible to adjust or to prevent bad strategic decisions if the top of the pyramid person chooses to make bad decisions. So Trump is doing all this stuff that just makes no sense in the campaign. It's just hurting him. But when confronted, his surrogates and his supporters can't engage with, yeah, maybe the reason the polls are shifting is because Harris is providing a vision that is more appealing and Trump is being super petty and is melting down constantly. Maybe we should adjust and change our campaign style. But you can't do that when the personality at the top of it all is what you have to first be loyal to. So if this is a part of what he's doing, then all right, we got to be on board with that. That's what I find super interesting about this. If you're watching this and you're thinking, at least I don't hate him. Okay, I don't hate this show. You know I don't like it. Okay, but you don't hate it. I'd appreciate if you click that subscribe button and support the work we do in a free, easy, but impactful way. Back to the video. Then you have this.
Economists have said those tariffs, along with mass deportations that would impact the workforce, will also drive up prices for Americans.
Well, Shannon, I don't buy that argument because Donald Trump was already president. He already secured the wall. He already implemented tariffs, which brought back 12,000 American factories were built during Donald Trump's administration, and prices were low and take-home pay was high. The entire argument of the Kamala Harris campaign boils down to forget how good things were when Donald Trump was president. Forget that we had rising take-home pay. Forget that we had low inflation. Forget that we had peace all over the world. And somehow, if you give Kamala Harris more power than she already has, she's somehow going to do something different than she's done for the past 3.5 years, Shannon.
I've gone through it so many times, so I know it gets boring. I won't do it all again here, but just remember what they mean by things were so good. Just look, please look at the data, look at the trajectory of things. Just where were things when Obama left office? And what were they projected to do, for example, economically? And then by some metrics, actually from what we were expecting based on the strength of the Obama economy, things actually a little bit underperformed under Trump. But okay, everything didn't collapse in the first 3 years. But being a president isn't about just not proactively ruining everything. It's about handling crises. And so things were pretty good. That's what Trump inherited. If you want to show me the change, not the raw stats, because I'll say unemployment was super low under Trump, and show me how much it dropped under Obama versus how much it dropped under Trump. Same thing as we understand the context going to Biden. Biden didn't get to inherit the more stable situation. He had to inherit a disaster that his predecessor was mishandling. And so when they say they want you to forget about how good things were under Trump, the first chance at actually being a leader, the first opportunity to show if he could lead and manage a crisis, he failed. That's why we voted him out of office, was because he was failing us so badly in that moment. So you need to stop making us, or wanting us, to forget about his defining moment, which was handling that crisis. Whereas Biden then comes in, inherits these crises, and his defining moment was pulling us out of that crisis, or the Biden-Harris administration. And doing so, when you compare, like I said, in a way that was more effective than every other country in the world. And so keep lying, keep misleading people about the underlying cause of these very real problems. But it seems people aren't buying that BS anymore. And they see that Kamala Harris both can represent an administration that has done a bunch, in recovering us and going further. The policies actually having an impact rather than Trump not really doing much on policy except for pushing more wealth in the direction of the wealthy. And she can represent that while also representing a new, hopeful future. Let me know what you thought of that in the comments. And if you want to support the work we do, you can do so by clicking the join button below.